Wake that ass up.
In the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ NV, Jess Hilarious, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. We have our sister Angela ride with us this morning.
Yes, indeed.
And we got a special guest in the building, Governor Josh Shapiro. Welcome.
Good morning.
How you feeling this morning?
Good morning,
Feeling
Governor.
real good. Working hard, feeling good.
You're not related to Ben Shapiro, are you?
Hell no. Okay. No.
He said that fast.
That's a visceral reaction.
No. Man, every so often, when he says some crazy thing, we got to go tweet, hey, just a reminder, I'm not related to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a short list of people who I would like to see, run for president one day, and you are on that list. Is that something you have aspirations of doing?
Now, look, first off, I appreciate that you take some note of the work we're doing in Pennsylvania. Like, sincerely, it means a lot to me. I'm all in for Joe Biden. And I think this is a moment where we've had some conversations. You've, candidly, you've pushed the party. You've pushed others to maybe think about some things that we hadn't thought about in the past. But we're locked. And this is a binary choice between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Joe Biden gets elected. I hear the conversation. I hear the chatter. I hear the noise. I'm humbled by it, truly. But honestly, I don't wake up at night in the middle of the night thinking about it. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking about the work I'm doing for Pennsylvania, the work I got to do as governor. And I think if you stop thinking about that, if you stop thinking about your responsibilities, then you don't serve the people of Pennsylvania well. And that's my focus.
If we still have a democracy in 2028, would you think about it?
Well, we are going to have a democracy
I
in
hope so.
2028. We sure are. And listen, I love public service. I was raised in a home where faith and family played a central role. My faith calls me to service. It's the really, I think the work I do every day is to try and help others. There's a teaching in my faith: no one's required to complete the task, but neither are we free to refrain from it. Meaning, each of us has a responsibility to get off the sidelines, get in the game, do our part. I love public service. I want to keep doing it. And I want to continue to serve as governor of Pennsylvania.
Before we get into the questions, how did you get here? How did you get into public service? What made you say this is something I want to do? Was it something that was done wrong by your family? What got you to this position and said, I want to run in this crazy politics game?
Look, I grew up in a comfortable middle-class home. My mom, a school teacher, she was a public school teacher in Philly till she had me and my siblings, and she was an educator later in her life. My dad was just like the local pediatrician, the local baby doc. And they were very focused on helping others. And also, as I said before, Charlamagne, faith played a really central role in our lives. Every Friday night we were around that Sabbath dinner table, something my wife and I continued to do for our kids today, grounding us in our faith that teaches us to go out and work for others. And so I didn't grow up thinking I wanted to be in politics. I certainly didn't grow up thinking I was ever going to be governor. But I did grow up thinking I had a responsibility to others. I had work I needed to do for others. My parents instilled that in me in an early age. It wasn't until later in life, actually in college, where I thought I was going to be a doctor like my dad, and I flunked out of pre-med. I was on the basketball team there, got cut from the basketball team. Both things happened in the exact same day, and I thought my life was over, right? And then literally that night, someone knocked on my dorm room door and said, hey, you should run for student government. I'm like, why would I ever want to do that? It was like never on my mind. As I look back on that pivotal day, which sort of set me on this path, I realized the truth is service was always there for me. I just didn't exactly know how I was going to do that service. So that's how it happened for me.
You played ball?
Hell yeah.
You ain't got no game.
I still do. Dude, I do have game. Here's the thing you got to understand, Charlamagne, about me.
That didn't sound convincing.
No, come on. I'll talk hoops. I'd rather talk hoops in politics, but when I was younger,
be a T-shirt, dude, I do have game.
I do. We put a hoop in at the governor's residence, actually. When I was younger, I was quick, but the game was slow to me. So I was a good point guard. I could see things happening. Problem now, being 50 years old, is the game is still slow to me in my head, except I'm slow as hell now, too. So I'm not very good anymore.
Well, if you get injured now, it's no longer a day to recover. Now it's like months.
And my wife, every time I go out and play, she'll go, don't get hurt. I'm like, how about, hey, have a good game, score? She's like, just don't get hurt.
Feeling protected.
And actually, I'm sorry, I mean, I could talk over. I do feel a sense of accomplishment when I get through the game and I don't get hurt. One of the most enjoyable things I do is go into a rec center in Philly without media, without cameras, without anybody, and just going and playing hoops with the kids there and then talking to them. And like, hearing their struggles, hearing what's on their mind, hearing their frustration, hearing their worry about their safety, hearing their, the fact it breaks my heart when some of them, kind of talk about how they feel like nobody's out looking out for them. And, I think it matters to them. Their governor shows up and actually spends some time with them, listens to them, and, frankly, learns a lot from them.
You seem like the governor that has the arm brace, the knee brace, the mouthpiece, and the headband. Is that you?
No, that's not me. That's not me. I don't wear the high socks.
All right.
I still got kids who keep me reasonably cool. Cool might be an overstatement, but I look normal when I get out there.
All right.
One of the things that we know shapes public policy often are the things that we see on TV. There's a show that's very popular out of Philadelphia right now, Abbott Elementary. Yeah. It's the one show I'm going to watch religiously. Yeah. Yes, and of course, Quinta Brunson is creator. You talked about your mother being a public school teacher. Yeah. How influential has that show? How has that been for you, given your own connection to the public school system? Of course, you had $1 billion increase in the budget this year to go towards basic education in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Look, I'm proud as governor that we fought hard and successfully got done the largest increase in public education in the history of Pennsylvania. And by the way, I did that being the only governor in the entire country with a divided legislature. So I got a Senate led by Republicans, House led by Democrats. Fun fact, there's only 2 divided legislatures in the whole country. That's the Congress of the United States. They don't get a whole lot done, and the Pennsylvania legislature. So we fought hard for that. I think what Abbott Elementary means to me, or sort of says to me, and I realize it's sort of different for everybody, is it shows the struggles, it shows the inequities, but it also shows the love that these teachers, that these administrators have for these kids, and the love that kids have back. And I think, isn't that the story of so many schools, that, these kids being able to do well, these teachers being able to do well, despite the fact the government hasn't always been there for them in an equitable manner. That's one of the biggest challenges we're facing in Pennsylvania, which is not just the dollars that go to school, which is important, right? And I'm proud of the money we put in, but the distribution formula. And I hate to kind of nerd out on you here, but you got to make sure that the dollars are flowing to the districts that need it most. And that's one of my big priorities this year, is not just increasing budgets, but making sure we're getting it to the schools that need it most, the schools that have been historically underfunded, the schools where kids are really struggling to get by. I mean, I'll give you just a concrete example of this. It's not just the dollars you write to school, but I got too many kids who were learning on empty bellies. I mean, you think about yourselves. You can't do this show without breakfast, without your coffee.
We were talking about it this morning.
Whatever. Yeah, and so we have big problems that I fought hard and successfully got universal free breakfast for kids. And I had, some people saying, well, kids should eat at home. Well, you know what? There are some kids who can't eat at home. And so we got to be there for them. Same thing with mental health. I know that's a huge issue for you. It's been a big issue for me. I campaigned on it. I talk about it every day. We got a new $100 million. It's about to, hopefully, God willing, grow to a $200 million fund just to allow schools to hire mental health counselors, have mental health resources online for kids. We got to solve these problems for our kids, and we've got to drive the dollars out in a more equitable way so students have a shot. I believe in making sure Pennsylvania is a place where everybody's, got the freedom to chart their own course and the opportunity to succeed. That starts in our classrooms.
How would you grade your current levels of equitable distribution? We're talking about schools, so it feels natural to grade you on this. Yeah. How would you grade it currently when you look at the schools that are getting the resources they need versus those that aren't?
Yeah, I think we're making progress, but we got a lot more work to do. And quite frankly, I think we get an incomplete grade. Let me explain why. Our appellate court in Pennsylvania ruled a year-ish ago, maybe a year and a half ago at this point, that we have an unconstitutional education system. And in effect, they said we have an unconstitutional education system because, number one, we're not investing enough. And number two, we're not driving the dollars out in an equitable manner. So we're beginning to claw back on the investment. This year, I got to make some progress on how we drive those dollars out. And so I think it's a fair question you're asking. I'd like to be able to come back to you in a year or two or three and answer it with a letter grade based on the progress that we're making after that court decision.
I got a question about some of the gun violence I hear a lot in Pennsylvania. What's being done to make sure we slow that down or even stop that? And I see a lot of drug use in Pennsylvania. I mean, I'm seeing it all over the country, but I do see a lot in parts of Brooklyn. I see it. I see parts of them in Philly where it almost people look like zombies. Like they're so strung out. What's being done to make sure we take care of that?
Yeah. look, you got this dangerous combination on the streets in Philly and elsewhere, as you said, Envy, between those who are battling the disease of addiction. And my words are purposeful. Addiction is a disease, not a crime.
Correct.
Those who are battling mental health challenges, and too many damn guns on our streets, including ghost guns, something that I've been working on for many, many years. These are guns, literally, they come in parts. You buy them on the internet, snap it together. Like, you don't have to be very handy to put them together. And you got an unserialized gun that's on the streets, and they tend to end up in the hands of kids. By way of background, before I was governor, I was attorney general. And listen, I prosecuted gun traffickers. We prosecuted those high-level drug dealers on our street corners that were infecting these neighborhoods and our kids with these poisons that were claiming too many lives. I held the pharmaceutical companies accountable. Remember, they're the ones that manufactured this drug crisis because they knew this stuff was addictive, and yet they continue to put it out because they put profits before people. We held them accountable, brought billions of dollars back to the states specifically for treatment. So I've been a prosecutor. I've done that work, but I also understand if you're actually going to make our community safe, you got to invest in treatment. You've got to invest in mental health. And one of the things I'm real proud of as governor is you also got to invest in community-based efforts to reduce violence. So yeah, we're hiring more cops, and I'm not ashamed to say that, and challenge me on that if you want. But we're also investing hundreds of millions of dollars in violence prevention money for community groups, money for church groups, money for the folks that are doing the hard work of, ideally with kids, keeping guns out of the hands of kids, showing them a way to resolve their disputes without picking up a gun, understanding that when you pick up that gun in the first place, we've probably failed that child and that generation if we let them think that that's the answer to their problems. So we got a lot of work to do, and my bottom line here is you got to come at it in a multidisciplinary way. It's law enforcement, it's community groups, it's mental health, it's drug treatment, it's all of that. We're seeing some progress. Listen, I'm not going to come on your radio show and say we're out of the woods by any stretch, but we are seeing some progress in the data. That said, if you're a mom that lost her kid, let me tell you something, the data doesn't matter to you, no matter how good it's getting. So we got to keep at it. We got to keep investing. We got to keep doing this hard work.
Why more police officers, though? I agree with all the investments you're making in mental health and, you know, fighting drug addiction, but why more police officers? Because people would say more police officers don't essentially make streets safe.
I think police officers need to be properly trained. They need to look like the communities that they are sworn to serve and protect. And we've got to make sure there is order in our communities. You go walk through these communities, as I do, and you listen to folks in communities. They want more police. Now, they want their constitutional rights protected, but they want to make sure that if somebody's wreaking havoc on their block, that order is restored. And I think you do that by making sure you hire police, again, properly trained, look like the communities are sworn to protect, hold them accountable if they break the rules, but make sure that you've got, order, you've got peace, you got security in a neighborhood. If a neighborhood isn't safe, kids can't learn. If a neighborhood's not safe, families can't thrive. Small businesses can't open. Small businesses can't do well. So you've got to make sure you create that safety. Safety is not only coming from police, but safety is coming from a multitude of the investments like I was talking about before with Envy.
You know, the thing that's interesting about police officers who look like the community that they're policing, I think it's important to understand, too, there can be Clarence Thomases with badges, and that's not always the best interest of, of the community. So it's not just...
I never heard it described that way.
Well, you got it.
I get your point. I get it.
You're clear. Either way, I think that you ultimately have to deal with the fact that looking like the community doesn't mean they're of the community. One of the things that's recently come up with the state legislature I think this bill was passed last week. It's a bill that prevents any cell phone handling in the car. And the first thing I thought about were like, oh no, this is another way that Black folks and brown folks will be targeted in Pennsylvania. So I'm curious to know, like, when folks are naturally, we're all, wired to profile something. We have our natural stereotypical pieces. So somebody's, driving, they got tinted windows or loud music. Are you looking for them to handle a cell phone? The likely answer for that is yes. So there were a number of members in the Black caucus who were like, I don't know about this. I think they reluctantly signed on. But what are you going to do in addition to collecting the data that they requested in the bill to ensure that our folks really are protected.
Yeah. Well, actually, Black Caucus was at the table, and thankfully they were, to make sure that that bill had added protections put in. I'm grateful for their hard work. And by the way, I think it's important to note, I want to come back to the crux of your question. You're seeing a real, real excellence in Black leadership in Pennsylvania government today. I mean, think about it. We've got the first Black woman speaker of the House of Representatives. Probably the most important decision I made during my campaign, one of the most important political decisions I ever made, was picking Austin Davis, a 30-something-year-old Black male, to serve as my lieutenant governor. He's been at the table for some of these. By the way, first Black lieutenant governor in the history of Pennsylvania. We've got Black leaders, history-making mayors in Philly and Pittsburgh and Harrisburg. So my point is, we're not only are we seeing more people of color occupy those seats, they're massive contributors to the work product of what is coming forth. And this cell phone bill, back to the crux of your question, this is an example of where they were at the table. There was an opportunity to be heard. There were amendments made. And ultimately, it was not only bipartisan. Remember, I got that divided legislature. But I think folks' views were heard. Now, to the other part of your question, we have to make sure that municipal police, right, so those are the police in our neighborhoods, and the state police, that's the police under my jurisdiction across the state, are trained in a way that they're not looking for an issue, as you kind of said. I think I'm paraphrasing your question, and making sure that they understand this pullover is designed to protect all public safety, including that motorist, and not, for any other reasons. And I can tell you, as governor, we will use that data to hold officers accountable if they are abusing that power that their representatives have given them.
How do you train somebody's natural biases, though?
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's underneath a person. A person could be racist. They could be sexist. They could be homophobic. You don't know. So how do you train somebody's biases?
Yeah, I think a big part is adding, and we're doing this at the state police level, and I want to see more municipal police departments do this as well, is less training on physical fitness. That's important. Less training on using your gun. That's important. And a whole lot more training on what you're thinking between your ears when you approach a situation.
I never thought about that. Social emotional learning for police officers.
No, big time.
Yeah.
Big time. I mean, listen, there is a natural way you feel. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so please, you disagree with me if I'm wrong. You feel when you approach a situation, a social situation, and you see people that look different than you. You see people maybe behaving in a way that certainly not criminal or wrongdoing, but where that might be different than you behave. And so I think studying that, understanding that, training about that, that's really, really important. Now, are we perfect in Pennsylvania? Hell no. We have a lot more work to do. But I think that type of training, that type of approach, just that type of acknowledgement by law enforcement leaders that, hey, you know what? When I approach a situation, I might feel a little bit different. Does that lead me to acting different? And I think for the vast majority of police officers, no, they don't. I think they act professionally, they act appropriately. But for those that do, we need to make sure that that training is deeper and it's more embedded in the work that they do.
Let me ask you a question. We talked about guns before, right? And the law has changed in the last 5 years, right? Very lenient when it comes to guns, right? So I'm reading it now, and it says Pennsylvania is an open carry state without a permit, right? And Pennsylvania does not limit the type of weapon which a person may possess. It could be a handgun, rifle, shotgun, or assault weapon. Yeah. What are your thoughts on the fact that it's been so lenient in the last 5 years? I mean, at one time, you could not own a gun in New York and New Jersey, and now, with the right permit, you can carry it anywhere you need to.
Yeah, and to be clear, if you're going to conceal carry, you need a permit.
Right, open permit for non-conceal, but conceal, you need a permit. But it's a lot easier now. Before, it was almost impossible.
I think the key here is keeping guns out of the hands of those who shouldn't have them. Criminals, youth, making sure we've got universal background checks. That's something I've been pushing for some time. Understanding that we can both, and this is a big deal. This is something I deal with every day as governor of Pennsylvania. We can respect the heritage of those who hunt in our rural communities and are responsible gun owners, and appreciate the fact that that mom in North Philly doesn't want to see her kid get shot when he's walking home from school. And you can accomplish both without restricting the rights of either of those individuals and those that they represent. It is really important that we have these honest conversations. Now, again, I got this divided legislature, right? So it's real hard to get stuff like this done, but we've been having more and more honest conversations about that. I go in these rural communities. I talk to these, mostly Republican leaning, Pennsylvanians. And I say to them, I'm not here to take away your gun rights, but we can all agree these guns shouldn't be in the hands of kids. These guns shouldn't be in the hands of criminals. And you know what? They agree. And so what I'm trying to do is bring about some more common sense when it comes to our gun laws in Pennsylvania. I think it's a model for where we need to go in this country.
There's a lot of things that you've done that I like, man. I want to touch on a few of them. The probation reform with Meek Mill, the Clean Slate 3.0. Can you talk to those? And the criminal justice reform. Can you talk to some of that stuff?
It's been a big priority of mine. You might think it's sort of strange. Hey, wait, a guy who is a prosecutor is also now leading an effort on criminal justice reform and second chances. Look, I believe, I think I said this before, D'Angelo, I think Pennsylvania needs to be a place, I think America needs to be a place where everybody's got the freedom to chart their own course, the opportunity to succeed. It starts in our classrooms. It goes through our small businesses. For some, it goes through a union trade hall. For others, it goes through the military. We got to create economic opportunity for people. But for those that we fail, for those who didn't get a chance, for those who get caught up in the criminal justice system, we also have to have a heart that believes in second chances. And I do. The legislation, the historic legislation that I worked on with Meek, that I worked on with others in the legislature who did incredible work on this, folks like Jordan Harris, Joanna McClinton, Tony Williams, and others, it says what our values are in Pennsylvania, that we're forgiving, that we believe in second chances, that we want to make sure you can get back up on your feet and get a shot to start your small business, go on your kids' school trip, whatever it may be. And I couldn't have been more proud and frankly more emotional to sign those bills into law. So now we wipe out, that's the clean slate part, wipe out part of or some of your prior offenses to give you a chance to get back up on your feet. We basically cap the amount of time you can be on probation. Look, Meek brought attention to this by virtue of the fact that he was having technical violations that were landing him back in prison. Understand, people literally aren't breaking the law. They are not committing another crime, and then they were being sent back to jail because of these technical violations. That's crazy.
He was trying to take his son to school.
Yeah, so that is now been addressed. We've got these, what I'd call sort of a soft cap, an opportunity for those not to end up behind bars, not to end up not being able to provide for your family. It's really, really meaningful stuff. And by the way, Meek deserves a lot of credit. He and I have become really good friends over a number of years. We've had a lot of raw and honest conversations. And if he wasn't willing to put himself out there and share of himself and be vulnerable, which is, not something any of us like to do, and certainly he didn't like to do, but as a result of him being out there, he's helping a whole lot of people whose names are not Meek Mill, who aren't famous, who don't have, audiences necessarily with the governor or with other elected officials. And I think Pennsylvania is a more just place because of his contributions and the hard work of many of us.
You talked about being all in for Joe Biden. And of course, last week, there was some groundbreaking news, historical news that came out with our former president having 34 criminal indictments. A lot of folks have been talking about the need for Joe Biden to pardon Donald Trump. If that were to come up with the federal cases. What is your posture on that, given the fact that you are responsible for balancing a divided state legislature?
Yeah. Well, first off, I'll be a legal nerd here for a sec. I'm sorry to do that, but he was convicted in a state court. So any pardon Joe Biden could give wouldn't matter because
the federal charges.
Right, that'd be a federal charge. And who knows if they're ever going to come to fruition prior to the election. Here's what I think we need to remember, for as challenged as our system can be sometimes. This was a case that was decided by 12 ordinary Americans. 12 of Donald Trump's fellow Americans heard all this evidence. They considered the law as presented to them. They made sure that they were diligent in their deliberations, and they found unanimously 34 times that he broke the law. And I think, whatever your politics are, whether you like Donald Trump, don't like Donald Trump, we have to respect the process. I've seen the process up close, again, as Attorney General. For all of its flaws, juries work, and juries need to be respected in our system. And so I think the jury should have, obviously, he's got a right to appeal. He'll have his appeals. He'll be heard by the courts. But I think the work of juries needs to be respected here.
It sounds like that's a no, so I'm going to pivot. and say, you talked about, again, being all in for Joe Biden. One of the things that I think Lennar brings up often that is important is there's a lot of attention placed on what we don't like about Donald Trump, that he's a threat to democracy, all the things that are said. What are the things that make you all in for Joe Biden?
Yeah, look, I think there's a clear contrast, and there's a lot of reasons to be against Donald Trump. But I really think, and this is the way I've always run, you got to provide people with an affirmative view on both what you've accomplished and where you want to take them.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think if you look at the body of work that Joe Biden has done, and I see this as governor, I mean, there's a lot I'm doing as governor as a result of the help Joe Biden's given. I think there's no question in this election Joe Biden is better for Pennsylvania and I would say better for Americans. I mean, look, from infrastructure, y'all saw when I-95 collapsed and we got that reopened in 12 days after they said it was going to take months. Joe Biden paid for that. He was on the phone with me over and over and over again, making sure the full force of the federal government was there. That's a big infrastructure project that we all saw. Here's one you probably haven't seen. There's a tiny town called Esplin, just outside or in the Pittsburgh area. It's like 1,000 or so people, predominantly African-American community. They've been drinking water out of their lines filled with lead for generations. Joe Biden gave a damn about changing out our pipes in that community, and now that mom can turn on the tap and not worry that her kid's getting poisoned with lead. That's not a sexy thing. That's not something that's, y'all are probably talking about on the show, but like that's meaningful. So when we talk about infrastructure and all this stuff Joe Biden's done on infrastructure, that's a concrete example of something that is helping people live healthier lives in a community that's oftentimes been ignored or forgotten. And yet you can look at all the indicators, right? Particularly when it comes to opportunity in the opportunity economy. We are seeing unemployment at historically low rates. We're seeing small business startups on fire. We're seeing real opportunity come all across Pennsylvania. I realize that those stats sort of don't vote. And I realize sometimes it's hard to feel those stats. And it's incumbent upon the president and me and others to kind of turn those stats into real world accomplishments. And that's certainly something that I plan to do and something I know the Biden campaign will continue to do.
Why don't they lean on, and I've said this before, on more people like you to deliver this messaging? Because their messaging sucks. And like, I'm not even in Pennsylvania, but I know a lot of the great things that you've done. So clearly your messaging is getting out there. Why is their messaging so bad?
I think we live in a really tough media ecosystem where you got to be on every platform, talking every different way, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's on the Breakfast Club, you name it. And I think it's incumbent upon them to make sure that message is getting shared by more people than just the president and vice president. Mm-hmm. She's a hell of a gifted, communicator. But they got to rely on others, whether, it's me or we got some amazing governors, right? Think about Wes Moore, Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin, Andy Beshear. I mean, we got incredible governors doing really, really good work. Rely on us, and certainly we're going to continue to talk about that on every medium we can.
You think the Trump conviction is going to cause political retaliation in the courts? Because like even jury selection begins today in the Hunter Biden trial. Do you think that it will be a tit for tat type thing?
I want to say no, because I believe in the system.
Come on. I'm
not trying to bullshit you. I mean, like, I really believe in this system.
But you believe in that other party, or the MAGA version of that party?
It is my hope that judges, juries, prosecutors, defense attorneys will ultimately do the right thing, which is just simply follow the facts, follow the evidence, and render a fair judgment. What scares me about Donald Trump is the way he wants to weaponize our justice system and use it against his enemies.
They've said it.
He has.
Yeah, the way he says literally he wants to be a dictator. Let me ask you, you don't have to be a great student of history to know. I mean, think about all the dictators that have lived throughout history. How many minority groups do well under a dictator? Not many, right? Minorities get screwed when there are dictators, and Donald Trump has promised to be a dictator. This guy's extremist. He is dangerous. He is someone who is out there to exact revenge. We don't do well when that happens. And so I think while I believe in the system, and that's why I kind of paused when you asked that, not that I was trying to evade your question, but like I want to believe in the system, but I'm scared to death if he's in charge of the system and the way he might try and use it to exact revenge.
Well, you sued Donald Trump before, right?
Many times.
2017 was the biggest one, right?
You sound real proud.
One near
many
every
times.
time. Listen, when I was Attorney General, I sued him over the Muslim ban. I sued him over so many different things and won nearly every time. And then during the 2020 election, he and his cronies sued us 43 times in Pennsylvania. First, to stop certain people from being able to vote. Let's be honest. They weren't trying to stop people who look like me from being able to vote. And then after those votes were counted, they sued to stop those votes from being, or after those votes were cast, pardon me, they sued to stop those votes from being counted 43 times.
Like tit for tat to me.
Let me tell you something.
That just sounds like tat, tat, tat.
That's a lot of tat. Yeah. I went 43-0 and he went 0-43. The rule of law held. And that's, I think, why I kind of paused when you asked that question, because the system has held. I just think now he's a greater danger. I mean, he is a clear and present danger. What's also different are the number of judges he's put on courts that can affect the outcome of these cases. Whereas in the past, the rule of law held, but you had judges who were willing to do the right thing, Republican and Democrat. Now, this is a different breed of judges that are out there. And I'm afraid that the impact is, that he can have to infect our justice system is really dangerous for everybody.
The federal case in Miami is a perfect example of this. This case is now just suspended in thin air indefinitely because it's a Trump appointee. But you talked about this system holding, and I think it's so important. I think, again, going back to something Leonard says that I get mad at, but I think he's right. You have to be able
Leonard,
to.
by the way, Governor.
I know.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yes, that's what his mom and them named him.
By the way, I saw you all on CNN maybe a month or two ago, and when she called you Leonard like that, she kind of gave you the side eye at the same time. I saw you sort of lean back.
Always.
When they start to fight in here, you just lean back. I just lean back.
Emmy literally is like, we're going to break, they're about to fight. But the system. And so I think for people of color in particular, you said we don't do well under dictatorships. There's not a whole lot of systems, even when we help to build them, that we do well under. This is not a Trump endorsement. Let me be very clear, because people are slow sometimes. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to be able to say where the holes are, where our blind spots are, and talk about the dangers of Donald Trump. We have to be able to say that right now we are working on justice reform because there are problems. Juries don't always get it right. Prosecutors don't always get it right. Public defenders don't always get it right. And so where do you find the balance in critiquing the system that you so believe in, right? And saying this is an absolute no, but let me tell you where we can improve.
Okay, let me give you a concrete example. So it's not just theoretical.
Also, the 43 times, you need to say that more. I don't think a lot. I didn't know that, and I think a lot of right.
I know about one.
That's powerful. Like
name
it, especially name it, because I'm not trying to give you political strategy on here. But really
please.
Quick.
Yes, she is. She's a strategist.
But the Fulton County case, it goes right hand in hand with what happened in Fulton County. So you should use that. Tell the Biden
and say
folks.
black. Don't say people that don't look like me. Say black and brown. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
I need a pen. I got to write all this down.
Because all white people don't look alike, is what I'm saying.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
It's fair.
You understood my point, but I'll be crisper in my words. I do believe in this system, but I also know the system is flawed. Let me give you a concrete example, and I saw this up close and personal. I realize you're giving examples where you might have a lawyer, a judge, whatever, with a bias, and that certainly happens. But what I routinely saw, where there was a breakdown, where there was an injustice done, is where someone didn't have access to legal counsel, where a defendant was showing up in court basically with one arm tied behind their back because they didn't have a good lawyer. And when you look at poor defendants or indigent defendants, the problem in Pennsylvania is even worse. We were one of only 2 states in the whole country when I took office that did not provide funding for indigent defense, public defenders. I campaigned on the idea of changing that, and in my first year as governor, again, divided legislature, we brought Republicans and Democrats together to get this done. We lost that distinction, and now we fund our public defenders. Because my view is, if you got a fair fight, right, then that's a big part of making sure that the system works. Still got to deal with bias, you still got to deal with personalities, things like that, but you got to at least start with that fair fight. And now we are beginning to have that in Pennsylvania by virtue of the funding for indigent defense. That's a concrete example. And that also says to someone maybe who has never been involved in this system, hey, I can have a little bit more faith in this process. I can have a little bit more faith in how the system's working. And I'm proud of that. I want people to look at government as a positive, progressive force for good in their lives. And no matter whether you look like me or white guy or black guy, you look at it and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to get a fair shot. And I know that there are too many people right now that don't feel that way. And so every day I'm trying to chip away and make it just a little bit better. It's a work in progress.
Another thing that you do that I love, in regards to messaging, you have the community text number. Yeah. For people who have questions and comments. Do you read all those texts?
I read a lot of them. I'd be lying if I told you I read them all. And I get I have my team give me a sampling of them. And by the way, good ones, bad ones, ones with questions, one where someone got help, one where someone didn't get help. And we're constantly working to change that. I think in government, there should be no wrong door to reach your elected representatives. Your governor, your mayor, your representative, you name it. We shouldn't have to force the public to bend toward the way we do it. We need to bend toward them.
That's right.
And so if they want to text me, great. I'm going to listen. It's another reason why I don't just stand up at, the press conference in front of the podium with the seal, the whole thing. I do some of that, but I also will go on TikTok or Instagram and do a live with someone about the very topic that I'm fighting for and reach people where they are. And look, I'm not here to blow smoke, but that's one of the reasons why I think y'all have been so successful. You're reaching people where they are. You're talking about topics that matter to them. Not that you're not forcing them to, sort of bend to what's on your mind. You're in touch with where the community is. And I think whether it's on the radio, whether it's on TikTok, whether it's in the newspaper, you got to meet people where they are. And that's what I'm focused on doing every day.
That's why I think it's so important. What about critiquing the party? Like as a Democrat, what do you think they're getting wrong right now in this moment?
I think Democrats gave up on rural communities across America, certainly across Pennsylvania, got too damn elite and started erecting artificial barriers to entry. And I'm trying to rip away those artificial barriers to entry and show up in these communities. Let me give you a couple concrete points. My first day in office, literally my first full day, I signed an executive order doing away with the college degree requirement for state jobs in government, 92% of our state jobs. That's 67,000 jobs that now you wouldn't need a college degree for. And by the way, in the years since I've done that, 60% of our new hires don't have a college degree. Why do I bring that up? There was an artificial barrier to entry. It was shutting people out for no damn good reason. Sure, if you're going to be a lawyer, we want you to have a law degree. If you're going to be a doctor working in the state, we want you to have a medical degree. But beyond that, you shouldn't have these artificial barriers. And I think what our party has done too much over the last generation is we've erected these barriers and said to certain people, we don't want you in the conversation. So I'm trying to do away with that. We've also said to certain communities, we're not only not showing up, we don't give a damn about you. Let me tell you something. I show up in these rural communities. I talk to folks. I listen. I deliver for them. And the election results show that they're, I guess, happy with the work I'm doing. But I think what it also has shown me, and I'm always learning as an elected official, is actually you go to one of these conservative rural communities or you go to one of these more progressive urban communities, everybody basically wants the same thing. It's four things. They want a good school for their kids. Right. They want safe communities. Right. They want economic opportunity. Right. And they don't want anybody fucking with their freedom.
That's right.
They want you to protect their freedoms. And we have too many people right now losing freedoms, losing opportunity. And instead, I think I'm trying to bring people together, Republican and Democrat alike, to focus on those four things. And we're making progress so that I can give a speech in Philly and I can give a speech in rural Venango County. I can go and have a picnic in a rural community last week and go to the Roots picnic this weekend and say the same thing to everybody. And I think that level of consistency we have not always shown in a party. That way of showing up, that way of erecting artificial barriers to stop entry, that's been a problem for our party, and we're trying to change that in Pennsylvania.
So as a Democrat, what do you think Republicans are getting right? Right.
I think it's a hard question because I think you have to separate out kind of that Trump wing of the party from, sort of the common sense Republicans, many of whom I deal with in Pennsylvania every day. I think they understand effectively the importance of creating economic opportunity in communities that have been left behind. I think they understand, I think I understand this as well, but you asked me about their party. They understand that oftentimes providing capital addresses an issue way better than some big program that takes a long time to set up and then ultimately doesn't work. I think those are some areas where, I respect the work that some Republicans in Pennsylvania are doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we appreciate you for joining us.
Oh, hold on. I got one more. I got a couple more questions there.
Oh,
I thought
you just shaking your head. I didn't know.
Oh, no, I was just listening.
Okay.
So with that said, why do you think MAGA supporters? Well, let me answer back to what you said. So why don't more Republicans that are, I guess, of sound mind, how come more of them aren't standing up against MAGA? Why are they just letting their party just succumb to MAGA?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I understand why you're using that term. I don't use that term, MAGA. I think in many ways it's actually disrespectful to the voters who believe in that stuff. But we'll agree to kind of disagree on that. But it is a difference between traditional conservative values and what we're seeing now. 100%. What I don't understand is just look at the sort of election data. And again, I'm keep coming back to Pennsylvania because it's what I know best. Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania by 44,000 votes in 2016. Since that time, Donald Trump has lost Pennsylvania in 2020, and every single one of Trump's offspring, including the guy I beat for governor, right, they've all lost every election. And in addition to that, they've lost branches of government at the federal level. They've lost ground in Pennsylvania. They've lost ground in other, swing states. I don't get why they keep following this guy and following the approach he brings, following his extremism, because even if you believe it, and I think most of them don't believe it because they're just weak cowards that are afraid. And so they just sort of go along with him. But it's also just not a winning formula. If you look at who's winning, it's me, it's Gretchen Whitmer, it's Wes Moore, it's Andy Beshear, it's Gavin. It's people that are doing common sense things in these states. And go look at the swing states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia. I mean, you're seeing Democrats win there on common sense messages, and you're seeing the extremist Donald Trump clones losing there. So why they keep following this guy, I just don't know. It doesn't make any sense.
So on a national level, what does it say about the Democratic Party that you got MAGA supporters who are still passionate about Trump, and they don't care if he's been convicted. They don't care if he says racist things, sexy. They don't care about none of that. What does it say about the alternative that they're still willing to support that?
I mean, I think maybe it says a lot about how we nominate people in our system today. It says a lot about how, frankly, many of the Republican leaders nationally are just profoundly and pathetically weak people that they can't stand up to this guy. And, I think they're going to have a real reckoning. If Joe Biden wins, as I expect him to win this November, they will have suffered defeat after defeat after defeat with Donald Trump. Like, he's not a winner, nor is his brand a winner. And so how they sort of course correct after that, I don't know. You're kind of asking me to sort of understand or predict the future, and I just can't. I just know that, I'm a very common sense, logic-oriented guy, and I just don't know why they keep following him when he keeps delivering L after L.
We have, you talked about Wes Moore. I think you all both brought up Wes Moore. We have one black governor in the country right now. We've never had a black woman governor. We have one appointed black woman in the Senate. But you talk about the party's obligation. What do you think the party's obligation is to ensure a more multicultural candidate base and bench? We don't have an up-and-coming Barack Obama right now, maybe except for Wes Moore. What is the obligation of the party to ensure that we talked about police officers looking like the community, that it reflects its base?
Yeah, exactly what I'm trying to do in Pennsylvania. Make sure, look, I realize I have worked my ass off to get where I am. And I was typically not the chosen person by the party or whatever. I've worked hard to get where I am. And I understand now I've got a responsibility to the next generation of political leaders to elevate people who don't look like me, to give them a chance to lead. And that's, again, I mentioned Austin Davis, our incredible lieutenant governor, 30-something. That's the only thing I hate about him. He's still in his 30s. But Austin is our first black lieutenant governor. This guy's poised to do incredible things if he wants to go beyond being lieutenant governor. Nearly, not every, but many of our leadership positions in our Pennsylvania legislature are led by incredibly talented African-American leaders, male and female. So I think my responsibility is to create that bench, to fund those campaigns, to fund those efforts, to help them be elevated. And I want to be clear, I'm not taking credit for their for their successes. But I like to think that I'm helping and supporting them along the way. I think if you build the bench there, state after state after state, then what you're going to see is a real change in our politics going forward.
I got 3 more questions. That's it, because this is some important stuff. The 10-year strategic plan that you have on aging, that's designed to improve services for older people in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Why is that so important? Because it always seems like people just forget about the old.
They really, first off, we've never had that in Pennsylvania before. And just look at some basic math, right? 1 out of every 4 Pennsylvanians today is a senior. By 2030, not that far away, 1 out of every 3 Pennsylvanians is going to be a senior. So, by the way, that creates a whole lot of workforce challenges, which you can talk about if you want. But it also means I want seniors to be able to age with dignity. I want to treat seniors with respect. Most of them want to stay in their homes if they can. We've got a healthcare system where we're paying a lot for it, but a lot of times those dots don't get connected and they don't get the help and the services that they need. They got rideshare programs to be able to get to doctors' offices, get to the supermarket, get to their senior center, whatever, except those rideshare programs don't always sync together with the needs of seniors. That plan pulls it all together, and it says to seniors in Pennsylvania, we're not only going to fund these things, we're going to make sure that the funding actually makes its way to you. We're going to treat you with dignity and respect. Listen, one of the things that seniors are struggling with, all Americans are struggling with today, is rising costs, right? Everybody listening to this show deals in some way with rising costs. I think you were posting about Big Macs or something earlier.
Two cheeseburger meal at McDonald's cost $9 now.
Right.
It was $2.99 when we was running up.
Yeah, and everybody's dealing with it. But I think you'd agree, seniors on fixed incomes, it kind of hits them even harder. That's why one of the first things I did was cut taxes for seniors as governor of Pennsylvania. By the way, we also cut taxes for families as well with child care expenses. We're trying to put money back in people's pockets. So this senior plan is both coordinating services and putting money back in people's pockets and saying to our seniors, we value you and we're going to treat you with respect and we're going to allow you to live your golden years with dignity.
And the $7 million that y'all are putting into Pennsylvania's main streets and communities. It's $7 million, right?
It's a little more than that. But listen, you want to look at the vitality of a community, the strength of a community, go walk down their main street. Now listen, you go to Philly, you walk down a main street, sure, there's tall buildings. It looks different. There's a lot more people. But there's a main street there, and there's a main street in those rural communities too. Maybe it's a lower single-story, building or what have you. But if those small businesses are doing well, if people see their main street as safe, if people see their main street as a place where they can actually have economic opportunity, the broader community is safer. The broader community has more freedom. The broader community has more opportunities. So I believe in main streets, and that's why we're investing so much there. We've also created a new fund. This is done. This isn't like pie in the sky for not just main streets, but we know a number of small business owners in our communities, particularly on those main streets, are minorities. And so we have seen too many minority small businesses not have access to capital and thus not be able to be as successful as we'd like them to be. So we created the first ever fund for historically disadvantaged businesses. So if they want to use it for capital, they want to use it for repairs, for whatever, a facade, they want to buy a piece of equipment that allows them to make more product, whatever. We now have funds for both.
And that's going to black, that money is going to black people.
Communities, right. Yeah. And then finally, when it comes to these small businesses, Pennsylvania is the number one purchaser of goods and services in our state, right? Meaning the state government is. And if you look at our history of procurement, about 4% of all of our contracts went to black-owned businesses and these small, diverse businesses. And so we're changing that. I signed an executive order to increase that amount. So we're coming at this in a number of different ways. We're putting capital in these businesses, and we're making it easier for them to get business with the state. You get a big state contract, all of a sudden your 20-person small business is 30 people, is 40 people. You're hiring people. You're creating opportunities for accumulation of generational wealth. You're transforming these communities with the power of the Commonwealth. So I want to be clear. We're not just like writing checks. We're putting capital out there, and we have an organized approach to making sure we are lifting up these businesses, lifting up these main streets that have been ignored for too long.
Last question. I have one question. With I guess every state dealing with the migrant problem. What is Pennsylvania doing for that situation? I think a day ago, 2 NYPD officers were shot by a migrant. They said they tried to pull him on the scooter. He was an illegal migrant. They said he came over through the quote unquote Eagle Pass, had a gun. He's been arrested before, but he shot 2 officers. So there are a lot of these states having problems with migrants.
That's terrible.
What is Pennsylvania doing?
They're building a wall.
We're building a wall in Pennsylvania?
No, I just said that.
What is wrong with you?
This guy's an idiot. Trying to have a serious conversation.
Trying to keep New Yorkers out? Or what? I mean, come on.
Might not be a bad idea.
I mean, we don't like Knicks fans, but still, we're not building a wall to keep you all out.
Jesus.
Listen, we've gotten busloads of migrants that Greg Abbott, has sent up to us. We've got a really wonderful network of, volunteer organizations, church organizations, others funded and able to provide supports for the individuals that end up in Philly. Candidly, we have not seen the numbers that New York has seen. We've not seen the numbers that Chicago or some other jurisdictions have seen. I think this immigration issue is a failure by both parties. You want to go back to kind of your broad thesis on all this. For years, through Democratic presidents, Republican presidents, Democratic Congresses, Republican Congresses, they've ignored what is a constitutional obligation to deal with immigration. And this, to me, is pretty basic. And this is where we got to stop focusing on extremes and start focusing on common sense. Yeah. Yes, we should have a secure border. There should be, whether it's a wall, whether it's technology, whatever, we should have a secure border, number one. Number two, we've got to have a responsible pathway to citizenship for those who are here. We've got to make sure that the dreamers are cared for responsibly. And third, we've got to have honest rules of the road going forward to say, if you want to come to this country, great. We are a welcoming country. We are a loving country. We are a nation of immigrants that has strengthened our society. But here's the rules you got to follow. And here's the process you got to go through. And the fact that Congress hasn't been able to do that, they were a little bit closer a couple months ago until Donald Trump threw a monkey wrench into it and told Republicans who supported the bill to do a lot of that, hey, you got to be against it because I need this issue against Joe Biden.
Politicizing it.
Goes back to the issue I said before. These are profoundly weak people who continue to put Donald Trump before country. But immigration is an area where we just got to employ some common sense. That's what the American people want. This is one of those things where the average American looks at this and they see the answers right before them.
That's right.
Yet the Congress hasn't been able to come together in a bipartisan way and sort it out. And Donald Trump has made that a lot harder.
My last question. You've been very generous with your
time. By the way,
time.
you said my last question.
No, I had 3. I did 2.
He had 3.
These are final closing. This is Black Church happening right here.
There's reports that say nobody flies private in Pennsylvania more than you, Mike Rubin, and Meek Mill. So what do you say to people that say the flights are coming out of the taxpayers' pockets?
We have a state plane. We've had a state plane for, 30, 40 years. I can go back and check. And I get around Pennsylvania all the time. I get around meeting people where they are. I show up. I work my ass off as their governor. I kind of have this informal rule in my own head. I don't want to be in the office more than 3 days a week, which means I got 4 days to be out in the community somewhere, listening, learning, showing up. And to be governor and show up in Erie and Philly in the same day, it's impossible by car. So I'm using the plane that other governors have used as well. And you know what? Showing up matters. And I think too often times our politicians hide and don't show up. I want to be there with the people.
All right.
And by the way, Mike flies on a hell of a much nicer plane.
Final pitch to folks for November. That wasn't a question. That was a...
Here's what I'll say.
That was a
statement. My last question says
extra
Charlamagne.
Extra last.
My extra last. Listen, there are going to be 2 names on this ballot and maybe a few other randos on there as well. This is a binary choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. But in many ways, I think this election is not about Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It's about all of us and what kind of country we want to keep building for ourselves. If you go back and look at the arc of our country, we have always made progress. Now, there have been chapters in our American story where we've taken 2 steps forward and then we've taken a step back. And I think for a lot of people, it feels like we're in one of those step back moments right now. But if you look at the progress we've made in this country, it hasn't always been made by people who occupy the White House or governors or people with titles. It's ordinary Americans rising up, demanding more, seeking justice, seeking something a little bit better for their kids than the way they had it. And so when people go vote this November, I urge them not just to look at the binary choice of candidates, but think about the kind of country we want to build. Do we want it to be decent and honorable, where we expand freedom, where we don't contract it? Do we want it to be a place where no matter what you look like, where you come from, who you love, who you pray to, you feel like you have a shot here. Maybe there's not absolute perfect equity and equality, but you feel like you got a shot where the system, as we've been talking about, is a little fairer, whether it's in our schools or in our criminal justice system. I think this election in many ways is a reflection on each of us and the kind of country we want to build. Now listen, I think if we want to build that kind of country, there's only one choice in this election, and that's Joe Biden, a guy who's focused on expanding freedoms, a guy who's decent, a guy who's honorable. I think the other choice is a dramatic reversal. I said before, 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back at times in our arc of history. I fear if Donald Trump is given the keys to the White House again, it's not maybe 1 step back, it's multiple steps back. And it's going to take us a generation to recover from that. And so I think when you go to the polls this year, yeah, of course, I'm voting for Joe Biden. I'm endorsing Joe Biden. I hope you vote for Joe Biden. But I hope you think about yourself, and I hope you think about the arc of history and the way that it has gone and your responsibility to continue the progress in this nation.
All right, there you have it.
Governor Josh Shapiro.
Governor Josh Shapiro, thank you for joining us.
Current governor of Pennsylvania, former future president.
All right.
Great to be with you guys.
That's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.
Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.